Hello, and welcome to the Surrendering to the Signs podcast. I'm your host, Laura Gates. I want to thank all of you who are reaching out to share your experience of this podcast. As you know, this is an absolute labor of love. And when I say labor, I mean we really labor over the editing process and trying to get the story straight and really trying to give you all an experience that takes you on a journey. The other day, I got a LinkedIn note from someone saying, keep going. It matters. Keep going. So I really want to thank you because your words, your encouragement encourages us to keep on this path. Today's conversation is with my friend Tim Winters, who I grew up with and stayed in touch with over the years. I reached out to him in October of 2022, which is when my sister passed away. I shared with him about her passing and also about how she had struggled with some mental health issues over the years, and he was unaware of all of that. And it was several months later that he reached out to let me know that he had gone through a recovery program. And in listening to his story and listening to his journey, I thought, wow, other people would really benefit from this story. And I asked him if he would mind coming on here and sharing it with all of you. And what I love about this podcast is this kind of idea of all the work that I've been doing for the past 30 years, one-on-one, behind the scenes with people, where people will lean in and whisper in my ear and say, I want to tell you a story I've never told anyone. I want you to listen in with me. I want you to join me in that conversation. And this is one of those conversations where I just feel so blessed and so grateful that Tim is willing to be vulnerable with us and share this very, very vulnerable story. I find it incredibly courageous, especially for someone who's out there in the work world and doing sales and knows that other people are going to hear this story, but is committed to using his own journey to help others. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome Tim in. And Tim, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, I guess I can do that. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm about the same age as Laura. We'll start with that. And I am in the software sales field. I have been doing that for quite some time. Grew up in Syracuse, New York, which is obviously where Laura's from. Went to college at Syracuse University. My father was a vice chancellor there, which was the main reason I was able to get in with the grades that I had, and got to Syracuse. And the only thing I really ever wanted to do when I went to college was to get out and start earning money. That was the big thing for me. And so I've had a pretty good career in the software sales field. And I have a great son, daughter-in-law, a couple of grandkids. They all play into my story, and took some paths that I didn't expect to take. And I think that's part of the reason that we're going to talk today.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I remember in high school that your parents would go out of town and we would have parties at your house. That's one thing I remember quite clearly. Not sure they knew we had parties at your house.
I'm sure that they did. And although I thought my mother was not always with it, she would always wonder why the house was cleaner when she got home than when she left. Yes, there were a fair share of parties, and my brother later continued that tradition to the point where the neighborhood wanted to ask my parents to sell the house and move because they were tired of the parties in the neighborhood, which was interesting. And it was in the, whatever the Syracuse paper is, the Herald Journal, there was a big story because somebody had a window broken. One of the neighbors went to the paper and said, we're tired of the stories. And so my parents came back to a Sunday morning paper read, and that was the end from the neighbor's perspective. My parents didn't move, but that's part of where it started and just continued going forward. I think that's where, from my perspective, things were pretty loose back in the 70s, early 80s, and you could drink and drive. And sometimes if you got pulled over, the cops would help escort you home. There was no rarely were there really what I'd call, or at least I don't remember, a lot of DWI. It was everybody get home safely. And that was really the mantra, at least from my perspective, as it relates to law enforcement and problem people like myself drinking and driving. And thankfully, in my life, I didn't do any damage to myself or to other people. I did other damage, but nothing that, is horrific as injuring somebody or any of those things.
So, one of the things I guess the main thing that I wanted to talk about with you, because I think your story, you're willing to tell your story, and not a lot of people, we don't often hear from people the journey to recovery. We often hear, I'm in recovery, or I went to rehab. We don't often hear what got us there and how do we get through it outside of those recovery circles, and where did it all start, right? And so part of what I'm hearing is where it all started was just a different culture, a different time, a different awareness around using alcohol. I know I was at those parties. I sometimes woke up in the morning and ran out to make sure the car was in the garage and wondered, how did that happen? So I do feel like we had angels watching over us in many ways, still feel that way. So tell us your journey. Tell us the path that you've been on and where it started and what your learnings have been along the way.
Yeah. So I think that the one thing that I typically have talked about is the fact that I grew up never really comfortable in my own skin. I struggled with an identity to some extent. I was a little bit of a chameleon and blended in with everybody. But I remember even at a young age, I was always a little unsure of myself. And I remember vividly at one point in time, I don't remember where it was, but I remember what my mother said. And I had said something, obviously in public, and my mother later pulled me aside and said, "It is better to be thought a fool than to speak and remove all doubt." And from that point in time, I became a little gun shy about what came out of my mouth. And that really continued throughout my life, where if I was unsure of what I was going to say, I kept it back, and it damaged a lot of relationships. I wasn't even able to be in a relationship, I would say, because I was horrible at communicating because I kept things in. I became a very closed individual. And I had some things, I'll just say, happen to me when I was in high school that were traumatic to me as a teenage boy, and alcohol became prevalent, or at least available. And that was the new way for me to douse some of the pain that I felt, and also made me a different person, made me more outgoing, made me happier, at least for the moment. And I didn't really think that I had a problem, although there would be a couple of times where I wasn't 100% totally sure of what had happened the night before, or at least there would be segments of the film reel that were missing. And I too sometimes would wonder where exactly the car was parked, in the driveway, on the lawn, whatever the case may be. But that's really where it started. And it continued to fuel as I went through college. Obviously, most people have gone to college. Most people have seen the experience of what goes on in college, where there's drinking, they got exposed to other things. And I thought I was really doing everything recreationally. I struggled the most with, in terms of being able to stop. I could stop drinking for periods of time, might be 7 days, I think I got up to 30, 45 days at one point in time. But these things always typically happen after something bad happened, whether I got in a fight with my son, or I was over the line at a party, or I was, whatever the case may be. Those were the things that got me to say, all right, it was really my way of proving to myself that I wasn't an alcoholic. I can stop drinking for a period of time. And it's interesting how, as I've been in recovery, that I can spot those things in other people. That it's amazing. You can see how your story is playing out in somebody else, for lack of a better term. And I'm no better than anybody else. I'm not out trying to tell people you're an alcoholic, you're not, whatever the case may be. I just know that I am. And the fact that I can't drink is the biggest thing that I have to remember every single day, because that what I have learned is that when I know that if I drink, there's a movie that I can play in my head that leads to a bunch of things that I was going through prior to going into rehab or being taken to rehab. So I'll just stop there and see. I mean, I could talk about things all the way through to how I got into recovery to, I mean, if you want me to talk about that, I can talk about that.
I want to touch on a couple things. First of all, because I knew you in high school, I find it fascinating. And I find this a lot with people, that the person inside, the person when they're really saying what was going on for them inside versus the person we see on the outside, there's such a difference, right? And I remember in high school, you as being very popular. Now, there were tools that you used for popularity. You used to have Pop-Tarts in your locker all the time. And so you knew you could go to Tim's locker and get a Pop-Tart if you wanted. And you would write notes. I don't think you wrote notes to the boys, but you wrote notes to the girls.
Definitely not to the boys.
Getting a note from Tim and reading that during class was a sign of popularity. And from the outside, you looked like someone who was happy and having a good time and had people around you all the time. And it just, again, it reminds us that despite what things look like on the outside, and that was high school. So I can't imagine how things progressed from there, right? That despite what things look on the outside, we don't really know what's going on with someone on the inside.
When you first reminded me of that Pop-Tart story, what clicked in my head was how that has continued throughout my life, which what I mean by that is that if I'm not comfortable, what I do to get comfortable or to make somebody, quote unquote, like me, is to buy things for them. And that's been it. And it doesn't matter who. Could be my son, could be somebody that I'm dating, it could be whomever. But it's interesting that you bring that up, because when we first talked about that, whenever that was, 3, 4, 5 months ago, that was the first thing that popped after I thought about it. That's where my head played out in terms of I started that trait of mine of overcompensating to have people like me back in high school. So I guess I've really perfected my craft.
Yeah, as we all do, as we all seek that formula from a very early age of what's going to get us love, what's going to get us acceptance. For some people, it's good grades. It sounds like for you, it wasn't good grades, right? For you, it was. For me and my family, the way we got love was to be smart and say smart things at the dinner table, because my father was an English professor, not the vice chancellor. So it was a different measure of success.
I'm sure my parents had the same goals and aspirations for me. I just, to some extent, started to rebel a little bit, and or maybe just always knew that there was a safety net there called Syracuse University, and that was always going to be there for me. I took classes, I think, every single summer in order to graduate in 4 years, which was a huge accomplishment from my perspective, based on the amount of drinking and not participating in class that I did. And again, I just wanted to get out and start earning money. That was always my desire. I worked through high school. I loved getting a paycheck. I loved having money to buy Pop-Tarts to put in lockers. And that was the thing for me. I wanted to earn. That's what I saw from my father. My father was an earner. He didn't want my mother to work. He worked hard. He made money. He provided for his family. I'm a firm believer that there are some things that you get from your parents or from others that you admire to be like. There's some things that you say, I will never be like that. And there's some stuff that you just get that you just get. You don't think about it. It just seems to happen. And I aspired, I think, after I got out of school to be like my dad, to be the provider, to be the hard worker. And that in reality cost me a marriage because all I wanted to do was work, earn, provide. And again, pair that with the fact that I stuck at being in a relationship because I couldn't communicate well, that just leads to a divorce, or at least for me, it led to a divorce. And that was the result of just the way that I operated, which is unfortunate, but is what it is. Can't go back and change the past.
You can't change it, but certainly, as you're saying, I feel like we can harvest that to learn and evolve and hopefully create a different reality for our own kids, even if it's this late in the stage of the game. And I hear that in terms of your relationship with your son and your grandchildren.
So you're right. And that's one of the things they teach in the AA program, which is just can't change. You don't shut the door on the past. But I can't also live in it. I can't change it. Like I remember it. I've learned from it, and I can only go forward. And thankfully, not only being a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, but I have a therapist that I've talked to for years, and I've recently, the last couple of years, started to see what I'll call a mindset coach, which has really helped me because going back to the uncertain kid, and I always was just very shy. I felt like I was looking at things with the glass half empty. And so now I start to, at least with her help and others helping me and just working a program, I start to see things from a much different light. And the one thing that I think for me as an alcoholic, Alcoholics Anonymous was great at helping me to stop drinking and figure out how to do that. But the bigger thing for me was I needed to figure out how to get better at living life and not having anxiety and all of these problems that caused me to drink and pour alcohol on top of it so that I could numb it, get it to go away for a minute, whatever the case may be. And so that's really what I always share and talk about, which was Alcoholics Anonymous. Yes, it helped me stop drinking, but I was really forced to make that decision ahead of time. It really helped me get better at living life and dealing with life. You'll hear said a lot in the rooms of AA, dealing with life on life's terms. And when I learned how to do that a lot better, the desire to drink and to do other things really was taken away from me. I mean, and I say that very cautiously because I am a drink away from going back into a place that I never want to go back to again. But I am just amazed at my own progress sometimes. And I don't say that to pat myself on the back. I say that because I guess I know where I was, and I get a little emotional about these things, but I know where I was, and I know I didn't know I was as bad as I really was. And I can see that now, and to be able to have a much more positive spin on things, it is amazing to me. I mean, before I was taken to rehab, I still believe that I am lucky to be alive at this day. I was doing things, most notably drinking. So when I think about that, and I think about that's a place that I can never go back to again.
One day we'll forget about the things we said we'd die for. Nothing's gonna last. Yeah, we got
and how hard it was for me. I couldn't get out of that place on my own. Many people may look at me and maybe have heard me share in a meeting or whatever and say his bottom, they referred to it as how bad you were. Clearly didn't. My parents were English professors. His bad wasn't that bad. He didn't look that bad. But in reality, I was given this book, King Baby, when I was early in rehab. And my son gave it to me. And it was interesting to read, but I was in a place where I couldn't get out of. The one thing that helped me when I first got into the program of AA and got into rehab, which was the fact that I constantly thought about whether I was an alcoholic or not. And I would have this conversation in my head, and I would prove to myself that I could stop for a week or 10 days or 2 weeks or whatever the case may be. Or I'd only drink on the weekends or whatever I would do to trick myself that I'm not an alcoholic. And I thought about, can I stop drinking? And I just would have this movie that would play forward, which was, how can I not drink for the rest of my life? And it's almost like I can't. So I'm just going to just try and control it or do whatever. And then when I got into rehab and was taken to rehab, people told me, you don't have to worry about the rest of your life. You just have to not drink today. It was like this big balloon had popped in front of me, and I finally realized that was the key, to just not drink today. And sometimes it's just not drink this hour, but that was the foundation, the key, one of the keys to me that really helped me work this thing one day at a time. Because again, I still get thoughts, or I'll go by especially in the summertime, you go by an outdoor patio bar area and you're like, oh man, I remember that. That used to be fun. And then again, though, the movie plays where I go have that drink. And then all of a sudden I'm kicked out of my house that I'm living with my son and my daughter-in-law with. The reason I got into rehab was my son said, you got to get out for the weekend. We're going to have that place cleaned. So we're getting cleaners to come in and do the whole living area where you are and clean everything out. And you've got to go stay in a hotel for the weekend. And I was like, okay. And I went up, I had packed a bag and I had gone upstairs and I saw my daughter-in-law and I was getting ready to go out the door. And he said, I'll take you to your hotel. And I'm like, I haven't even made a reservation yet. And she said, don't worry, I'll take you. Just wait 1 minute. And I knew right then and there, I mean, I'm not the sharpest kid in the neighborhood, but I knew something was up at that point in time. And so I got in the car with her and we were probably 5 minutes into the drive, not even. And I remember saying, where are we going? And she said, I'm taking you to rehab. And I remember for a split second, I had this thought of, we're only going about 30 miles an hour. I could yank the door open. I could roll out and run, play that movie forward. Where am I going to run to? I don't even have my suitcase. I'm not going to be allowed back in the house, just going to be out on the street. All of those roads lead to nowhere. And right after that split second, I finally just said, I have to just surrender and give up. And I go to this intake place. I am thankful to this day that they made a decision for me that I could not make for myself. Because I am fairly certain I would not be talking to you right now if I continued to live the life that I led, even though that was a mere it'll be 3 years in a couple of days. Long-winded story. Sorry, I go off on a couple of tangents and I'll talk for days.
No, it's powerful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing all of that. I want to touch on a couple things you said. First of all, we hear it all the time, right? One day at a time. Just don't drink for today. The way you described how it impacted you was clearly powerful, right? It wasn't just the words. You had some kind of aha moment when you heard those words that you hadn't taken in before that.
Yeah, well, I think that what the aha moment for me was the fact that somebody saw that I had a problem that I in reality knew that I had, but I couldn't get myself to do anything about it. The interesting thing that and I don't know if I shared this with you, but probably a week prior or the Sunday prior to this event, which was on a Friday, I had gone to, they play football games 9:30 on Sunday morning sometimes. And there was a local bar that I go to that opened up at 9:30 so we could all come in and watch football on Sunday morning, which obviously required alcohol. And I probably had, I don't know, 3, 4, maybe 5 drinks while we were watching the football game. And I remember going back to the house that I was living in with my son and my daughter-in-law, and both my grandkids were around. And it was a nice Sunday afternoon in the fall. It was probably 70 degrees, sunny out. And I was on the back steps, just not totally drunk, but just I'm sitting there talking to my girlfriend. And I told her at the time, I just felt like I was wasting the day away. And I just half kidding said, I should probably be in rehab, just kind of kidding around. And lo and behold, less than a week later, I'm being taken to rehab. I think it was helpful. I started to see the signs. And when I shared with you before that before I was taken to rehab, I had told my son and my daughter-in-law that I was having some issues with depression and anxiety, which I have had for quite some time. And I've tried to get a psychiatrist and my therapist to help me regulate that with medication, which is close to an impossible task when you're drinking. I had told my son and my daughter-in-law that I was having some anxiety and depression issues. Just wanted to be honest with them, but I just want to let you know I'm struggling with these issues, and I'm working with my therapist and my psychiatrist. And I remember my son asking me at that point in time, do you think it has anything to do with your drinking? And my response right away was, oh no, cannot be my drinking. It has nothing to do with that. It's all of these things that go on in my head that lead me to have the anxiety and depression issues that I'm having. And fast forward to getting sober, all of a sudden, some of these things start to lift. The anxiety and depression starts to lift. And it's not that I wasn't still having some fallbacks, but I could see progress in terms of just being able to deal with the things that I had hit me, problems, whatever the case may be, in a much different manner. I didn't have to just go have a drink or do a shot or do whatever. I just needed to use other tools that I had learned since coming into rehab and Alcoholics Anonymous that made it so much easier to live life that I was amazed. Now, my life is not all just red carpets and sunny days, but I deal with the day-to-day challenges a heck of a lot better than I clearly did in the past.
I don't know if I shared this with you that I quit drinking right at the very start of COVID, and it was because I was in Santa Barbara with family, and they have great wine in Santa Barbara, and we were all having great wine. All adults except for my niece, who was a teenager in her late teens at the time. And I woke up in the morning. I woke up at 3 a.m. with a headache, and then I woke up in the morning feeling nauseous and feeling similar to what you just said, feeling like, "Ugh, I'm going to waste this day." Here I am with my family visiting from out of town. Everybody was visiting from out of town, and I was going to be hungover. And I just woke up feeling like, I'm tired of this. I'm tired of this. And also, I felt like, what are we teaching my niece? That this is what adults do. This is how you have fun as an adult. You sit around and you drink wine. And here we are telling her, don't drink, which she probably was on this sneaking around. And it just made me think, like, what message, who's modeling for her a different way? And I decided right then and there, I'm not going to drink anymore. And I remember I wrote something on Facebook and people were like, you got to go to AA. You should read this book. And it was interesting for me because I'd also stopped drinking. I'd stopped drinking for a year at one point. I'd stopped drinking for 90 days at one point. And I didn't ever felt like I had a quote unquote problem. But there were days where I was like, I need my wine. Where's my wine? There were times I would stand in the kitchen holding a bottle with the corkscrew in, waiting for the clock to get to 5, literally waiting till it clicked 5 to say, okay, now I can have a glass of wine. That's problematic, right? I'm sure if I were in AA, can't even say it. If I were in AA, they would tell me that's one of the things, right? For me, it was enough to simply make that decision. I was just crystal clear by that time. And I also never wanted to wake up at 3 a.m. feeling the way that I felt that morning. And I remember people saying, oh, congratulations and good for you. And I could never do what you did. And for me, again, it was actually the opposite of what you said. It was, I don't ever want to feel like this again. I was in my 50s at the time. And I was like, you know what? I've been drinking since I was in high school, one way or another. I'm done. I just don't ever want to put alcohol in my body again. It makes me feel sick to even think about it. And I travel a lot, and because I travel so much, I go into the lounges, and it just astounds me. I was just in Washington, D.C., and walking through the United Lounge and just seeing in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, people at the bar drinking. You go to the United Lounge in London and all you hear are champagne bottles being popped the whole time you're sitting in the lounge. And it's so much a part of our culture. It's so much of our way of being. My husband and I used to go out and drink at least a bottle of wine at dinner, and living in Northern California, it just was a part of life. And now neither of us drink, and I don't really think about drinking anymore. I don't really think about going to bars. It was such a part of our consciousness that it's now no longer a part of our consciousness. I remember we had a dinner party and we invited some friends, and I had someone do some catering for us because I wanted to try her out for the retreats that I lead. And she knew one of our friends, and she had said to one of our friends, this is a dry house. And I was like, what does that mean? Like, we don't drink if I just wasn't going to serve it. I wasn't really thinking about it. So it's just interesting to see how much of our lives are circled around alcohol. And it's one thing to go in and get clean and do rehab, but then living your life post rehab, I think for me sounds like the biggest challenge that, and I watch these Instagram videos of this. There's this one guy, he pulls up to people on the street and he's like, hey, I'm committed to getting addicts off the street. Here's my number. I'll get you a scholarship. I'll take you to rehab. I'll help you out after rehab. And you watch these people's stories, and these are severely addicted people living on the streets. And the ones that go through to the other side, it is such an incredible transformation. It's so remarkable. And last week, I must have watched 5 hours of these videos because there's something so hopeful in that. And yet half of them leave halfway through. Half of them have to go back 2 or 3 times. Some of them never show up. Because the thought of living without that is so terrifying to them. It's like you couldn't imagine not being able to numb yourself without alcohol. And so I'm just curious, how does one go through life post rehab? You're talking about some of these tools. What shifted for you that it was better than the alcohol? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So I think the thing that shifted for me was I was at my bottom. I knew that the path that I was on was not, they will tell you that you're either going to end up jails, institutions, or dead. That's what you hear early on in AA, depending on the group that you go to. And so I looking back at it, I would have ended up in one of those places. I had done a couple of overnights in a jail. I had to check that box. I'm sure that some people probably thought I should be in an institution. And thankfully I wasn't dead. So for me, when I got out of rehab, or when I was getting ready to leave, they said, you need to go stay somewhere where they don't drink. And I wasn't allowed back into the house that I was living. Where I knew somebody was Winston-Salem's, North Carolina, where my brother, who's been in the program for a long time, lived. And he also, before I came there, said, this is a dry house. So when you said that, that's the first thing that I thought of. But to answer your question, there were two things. I was doing intensive outpatient down in Winston-Salem, and you sit in a meeting and they will tell you that look to your left, look to your right. One of the three of you is the one that makes it sober. And the ways that you make it sober is that you work a program like AA for at least a year. You do certain things when you walk in the door. They will tell you to do 90 meetings in 90 days, work the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, get a sponsor, get somebody to help guide you through this new thing that you're learning all about. You get what they call a home group, a meeting that you go to on a regular basis. So you start to develop relationships with other people. Because for me, one of the big things that made me drink was the fact that you get isolated, especially during COVID. A lot of alcoholics created, I'm sure. You get isolated, and all of a sudden, the only thing you really think about doing is drinking. And at least for me, sometimes that was the case. But I do think that I remember when I was let into the wild, I call it, and I got out of rehab and I had to go down to North Carolina all by myself. I was staying in a Marriott until I could make the trip the next day in the greater DC area in Tyson's Corner. And the person I was dating at the time didn't live in the DC area. And I called her and I checked into the Marriott, and they don't have mini bars anymore, but you go through a lobby, there's a bar right there. There's a couple of bars right there. Long story short, I called the girl that I was dating and I said, hey, can you please come up here? Because I don't trust myself being alone. This is my first day out and I just don't want to have a relapse. And so thankfully she was nice enough to come up and spend the night and then help me transition down to North Carolina. But the one thing that I still have to this day are a bunch of what I'll call firsts. And they are the first time I went to a hockey game and didn't drink. The first time I did this and didn't drink. And it didn't help me when I finally got out of rehab. As I even just drove down the street, I find myself looking left and right, drank there, drank there, drank there, drank there, almost got in a fight there, all of these things. And I think that thankfully for me, or maybe not thankfully, I don't know that I could have done this when I was younger because there's such peer pressure of everybody drinking that
you're in sales, right?
and I
all
used
part
to,
of the territory, right?
Yeah.
You go to these conferences, you're traveling through airports,
and I was all of those things. And but I feel like when I started to become sober, I started to notice sober people more and more. And I've talked to people like yourself. I've talked to other people where they are all starting to either stop drinking or dramatically remove the amount that they either liquor they have in their house or are just reducing the amount that they drink because they don't like the feeling. They've read a report about how it does this or that, whatever drives you to get there. That's what they've done. And all of a sudden I start to see more and more people that have said, listen, I've had enough. I'm not going to drink anymore. I had somebody come up to me and say, I was at a function and they said, why did you stop drinking? And I said, I've drank enough in my lifetime and probably enough in your lifetime too. So I've had more than my fair share. And I've learned to appreciate things so much more. It's amazing to me. And I always hear people tell stories, and I'm not trying to tell anybody that there's just, again, all of these beautiful roses ahead of you. I just know that I'm a much more valuable person to the people around me when I am sober than clearly if I've been or am under the influence of something. So I look at myself. I joked around. I was in a meeting a couple of days ago, and I told a similar story. And I say, I feel like I'm a little bit of a trendsetter. I'm starting to notice everybody else is getting sober since I've started to get sober. In reality, I'm probably just hanging around with more sober people than I am
No, I
alcoholic.
do think there is a trend. One of my favorite podcasts is Diary of a CEO, and he's had several people on there talking about the damages of alcohol and what it does to your brain. And we're all worried about longevity, and we're all worried about getting Alzheimer's and dementia, and it's all intertwined. And I definitely feel there is a trend. I feel like amongst women, for sure, I'm seeing a trend, and there's more and more books out there. Sober Curious is one. I've spoken to the author of that book. And I think women are realizing, especially women who are going through menopause, which is a huge topic now that's also everybody's talking about. You add, and I'm sure that was part of my decision as well, you add alcohol to hot flashes, to hormonal changes, and you never will get a good night's sleep again. And I think a lot of, especially women I know, we're putting sleep as a premium, as the number one thing that we need to be healthy. And alcohol disrupts that horribly. Already our hormones have us up at 3 a.m. You pour alcohol on that and you wake up at 3 a.m. and you've got a headache and you're nauseous. It's not a good combination. So I think people are starting to put their health and their well-being above, let's call it recreational drinking even. And I'm noticing that more and more. I'm noticing also people are less. One of the things that I noticed when I decided to not drink was if I did go to a social event, someone would say, if I'd say, I'll just have a Diet Coke, and they'll say, why aren't you drinking? What? Is that a helpful question? I don't think that's a helpful. Why do we ask each other that? But it's a thing. It's so much a social thing that we notice who's drinking and who's not drinking. And probably, to your point, the people who are drinking are wondering why we're not all joining in.
Yeah, I think that I think for at least me, when I first came in, you do, or at least I had to be prepared for those scenarios. And but the biggest challenge when you come out, for me, when I came out of rehab, was all of a sudden I had all of this time that for me, was the big hurdle now. I've got this time where I used to spend, to your point, got to be 5 o'clock. I'm going to have a cocktail. I may still do a couple of emails, or I may take my laptop to a bar and do some more work. I may jump on another call while I'm having a cocktail. But now I've got all of this time when I'm not doing these things. What do I do? And that's where I spent, especially early on, because I had just coincidentally, before I went into rehab, I was having these anxiety issues, and I went out on disability to try and get my head right. And I wasn't working. So I was in North Carolina. I didn't know anybody. So I spent a lot of time I joined a Planet Fitness, spent a lot of time. I would go to the gym 2, maybe 3 times a day. I'm not doing huge workouts, 20-minute elliptical here, half-hour elliptical there. But that was one thing, and I would go to more meetings. But I think for me, the biggest challenge was, what do I do with all of this time now? And so I think once I got past that, it was a big thing. But then again, going to the social things, I early on, and sometimes still do, when I know I'm going to a happy hour, I'll call my sponsor. I'm like, hey, I'm going into a happy hour. It's a work thing. I just want to give you a heads up. I think I'm fine. I think my head's right. But it's just, that's the great thing, is at least what they encourage you to do is start to get a lot of phone numbers of other people in the program, so that if you are having that thought for a second, you reach out to somebody. But for me, it's having that pre-planned story of, like I said, why don't I drink? I had some health issues. And for me, that's not telling a lie. The health issue was, if I continued to drink, I was going to die. So I would consider that a pretty big health issue. And that's the thing that I have to be prepared for when I walk into scenarios. I still, again, get that fleeting thought of, man, it would be good if I could have a cold beer on a summer day. And that's just my mind trying to lure me back in. But I know that I can't do that. Don't want to beat a dead horse. But I think that everybody finds their own way. And thankfully, they have things like Alcoholics Anonymous that has helped me at least have a program to work so that it's not just because I tried to do it on willpower. Willpower got me 30 days, maybe 45 days. At some point in time, willpower runs out, and at least it did for me. And my mind starts to take over, and that drink isn't going to kill you, and a lot of things. So, and I have too much to lose. I am I think, my son may have a different opinion. I have a much better relationship with my son, I think, today than I did in the past. I get to spend time with my grandchildren, which is an amazing thing. It's just great to watch them grow and spend time with them. And there's just so many other things that I'm grateful for. I'm talking to you, right? What would the odds be that I'd be talking to you if I continued to drink? Probably not. I've started to develop other relationships with other people from my past, or just other people that I have just met through the program that has just made me appreciative of the relationship in itself. When I was in a relationship before, it was either what can I get or what can they do for me? And now I don't have to go into any relationship with those things hanging over any engagement that I had with anybody. I can just be myself. And if people like me, great. If they don't, no harm, no foul. I won't be the first, won't be the last person that thinks Tim Winters is a little rough around the edges, or maybe not my cup of tea. I'm good with that. Before I would probably drink over it.
I don't think that we would exchange birthday texts every year, but I don't think that we would be talking the way we're talking if you had not taken the risk to share your story and be vulnerable with me about what was going on for you. And maybe it's because when we had that conversation 3 years ago, I was going through the grief of the loss of my sister, almost, I think, around the same time that you were going through this. And I think that just was like this collision of my experience and your experience. And of course, you knew my sister. I think that just broke open this doorway that we started having this more vulnerable conversation that we're having.
Well, I think that you started that because I had not stopped. I was having clearly anxiety issues when your sister passed. I was not there. I had not been taken to rehab yet, but I don't think it was far behind that.
I did not know that. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. And so I think I share my story with people that I'm comfortable with. And when we first talked, I know when we talked over this past summer, and I was asking you about how you became a life coach and executive coach and all of these other things, because one of the things that I've started to do all of a sudden is listen to a lot more. I call them self-help books. They're more for how to deal with things, how to live life better, and it could be helping me get better selling, whatever the case may be. And I'm able to be, I still get closed at times. And so I'm able to be open with people that I feel comfortable with. And as I told you before we even started this, I had a minute of anxiety before doing this podcast, but I believed and had faith that you were going to lead me down a path where I was going to be okay. And I didn't need to be nervous or scared. And thankfully, I still feel that way right now. And I felt that way when we first talked, where I could open up, because it is a little scary at first. It's no different than when I go to a new place, like I go on vacation and I'll look to find an AA meeting around there. And there's the minute you drive up to the wherever the meeting's being held, and it's, oh, I don't want to go in. What are these people like? And then you go in, and then you come out of the meeting. And I always say, I have never left an AA meeting feeling worse than when I walked in. And I've never really felt worse talking about my story afterwards than I did beforehand. I know some people may think I'm trying to help other people. This is therapy for me. I still have a very big ego, and this is one of the things that helps me just get better at being sober, is being able to talk about how I got here, reinforce with myself some of the positive things that I try and do. And I'm one of these people, unfortunately, I don't know how to turn it off, where I get these photos of what happened X number of years ago on November 9th or November 10th, whatever the date is. And I happened to see one yesterday where I was in a picture with somebody that I was dating. And I was like, man, was I a lot heavier. And so it's those things where even that little snapshot of, I look thinner, I don't know better, but I look thinner now than I did back then. That's something that helps me reinforce that I'm on the right path, I'm doing the right stuff. And if I can help somebody else out, that's part of what AA teaches you, is do service. So I lead meetings, I do other things to try and help people. I sponsor people, all stuff that helps me. So you put me in front of a microphone and I'll babble on forever. So my apologies in advance.
I think it's really helpful that you're sharing your story for a couple reasons. One is, someone can look like they've got everything together on the outside, and then all of this is going on in the background. So much so that you're feeling like we wouldn't even be having this conversation. Probably people you work with day in and day out would have no idea what's going on behind the scenes. And I just want to emphasize that we have no idea what's going on for people. People had no idea what was going on for my sister. We just don't know. We have no clue. Everything looks bright and shiny on the outside, and it's far from that. So just us having empathy for other people, paying attention to other people, checking in with other people. Another part of your story is that although you said those words a week before you went into rehab, like, I probably should be in rehab, it took someone else acting to actually make that happen. And I'm curious what you would say to people who have loved ones who they're watching go down the drain, literally, who feel like either, oh, I've said it a million times and they're not listening, or I've cajoled, threatened, whatever, or it's a person, like, that's your life. Maybe someone in the workplace saw you, or maybe someone in a bar saw you, but we feel like there's this boundary we don't want to cross, that we don't want to intervene in someone else's life. And I'm just curious, or maybe someone who has tried to intervene many times and they figure, why bother? This person isn't hearing me. They're not going to change. Just curious, from your perspective, what would you say to people whose loved ones are going through what you went through, what your family went through?
Yeah. So I think that there are a couple things. One, I think that having a conversation, I think if you're concerned about somebody, have a discussion with them and just be honest about how you feel, and just try. And the only thing that I would suggest is try and not, I guess it depends on where you are in the relationship with them. If you're on the last straw, then maybe it needs to be a little bit more forceful. But there are many people that whispered to me or said, hey, maybe you have a little bit too much to drink. They were trying, I think, sometimes to politely tell me that you've got a little bit of a challenge with alcohol. I know even my brother would hint at it, but he also knew at the same time, I'm ready when I'm ready. And so I think that's the one thing to always remember. Some people, you don't know where their bottom is, right? Having 3 DWIs and and wrecking a car isn't enough for some people. They need to experience more for whatever reason. So the big thing is, I think it's important to have an honest conversation with somebody. And more importantly, not necessarily accuse them, but say, when you drink, I feel like, and I always look at it as talking about how I feel, not what they did. So that would be my first suggestion. I know other people have suggested maybe you check out an AA meeting, right? There are open meetings that people can go to. You don't have to declare yourself a quote unquote alcoholic. You can just go to an open meeting. I've had people that I know go to an open meeting with me, even though they don't believe that they have a problem, or maybe they don't even have a problem. They're just attending in support with me. You can go and just see what goes on and check it out. Maybe that's a recommendation for somebody. Check out a meeting. I know when I first went into the detox area that I was taken to, for some reason, I read the AA pamphlet of the things that you might be if you're an alcoholic. And I know that I've seen that pamphlet before, but it was interesting how all of a sudden I realized this time that I checked all of the boxes. I switched from vodka to beer to make myself believe I'm not an alcoholic. I abstained from drinking during the week. Whatever the things that I do to get myself not to believe, because that's really what is going on, in my opinion, is that we're all trying to, it doesn't matter if the problem is alcohol or something else. When we don't want to believe that we don't have a problem, then we get our mind to tell us the right thing. It's no different than when I used to go into the doctor's office and they gave me this alcoholic questionnaire. And the first thing I did was I went to the back of the questionnaire to see what I needed to score in order to not be an alcoholic, or to suggest that I have a drinking problem. So if the number's 18 and there are 10 questions, I'm like, all right, I can answer a 1 or a 2 on a bunch of these and I'll come out not an alcoholic. Just another way to tell myself or get a doctor to believe that I'm not an alcoholic. In terms of talking to other people, that's always a tough thing. There's never a right time and a right place. People always talk about interventions. Those go okay. I had a scenario where I had to have an open and honest discussion with somebody that I think that it was a pretty frank discussion, and it wasn't a lot of grittiness to it. It was pretty open and honest. And I sometimes thought maybe I went a little over the line, but at the end of the day, the message didn't get received, and it is what it is. All we can do is try. And at some point in time, the decision has to be made by the person in terms of whether they want to get help or whether they want to stop or not. For me, I realized that I was not going to be in people's lives if I didn't get my stuff together. And so that was enough for me to say, whatever it takes, I'm going to do this and stay sober one day at a time.
Thank you. One of the things that this podcast is about is you've used the word surrender, you use the word signs. We're talking about surrendering to the signs. We're talking about the universe, consciousness, spirituality, however you want to say it, that is maybe guiding us or putting things in our path to guide us, or maybe even showing up for you now that you're not drinking in a way that it didn't show up before. Is there anything about that speaks to you in terms of your journey and your path?
Yeah. So I brought that up because I did really, I'll share a couple of things really quickly. One was the first day that I went to my first rehab. When I was first got out of rehab, I started to build what I call a toolkit, all of these things that I could use in order to stop drinking, or to, if I got an urge, I'd meditate for 5 minutes, or I do this, or I do that, box breathing, all of these things that I kept a big list of, and I still list to this day. So I built that toolkit as a way to help me get through things early on, and still to this day, because I know that if I get depressed or start to get depression and anxiety to build up again, that's what's going to take me back out. And so I have to stop that from happening before That's step one, so that I make sure that I don't get to step two, which is picking up that first dream. But what I've shared before is that when I first went to what they call Ashley, it's Father Martin's place. And if you're familiar with sobriety, Father Martin's a pretty well-known guy, a lot of YouTube videos and other things. But this is like a beautiful campus right off the Chesapeake Bay. And I call it the Ritz-Carlton of rehab. So at least it was. I'm sure there are others like it. But when I first got there, I got there on a Friday after I'd gotten out of detox. And I was given a tour of the campus, and my tour guide said, and over here, this is the main meeting area, but on Friday nights, we have a talent show that what we do every Friday, and it's really just to show people that we can have fun without having alcohol. And so I'm like, all right, noted. And I went back to my room, got my stuff together, and then I went back to this quote unquote talent show. I would argue that it was a lack of talent show, but that's a different story. The building with the talent show was on my left, and I just had to make a left turn to go there. And there was this small little church, I'll call it a church, and you could look out on the Chesapeake. And I had this, just all of a sudden I was told, go to the church. Church and I were not best of buds. I would probably go to church on major holidays that my mother would drag us to, Easter, I guess we'd go Christmas Eve. And even as I was an adult, probably went really Christmas Eve. It was always in support of my mother or doing what my mother told me. But I went in here and I remember kneeling down, and I don't remember specifically what I prayed for, but I remember being thankful that I was there. I remember praying for my family because they had to deal with my crap. And I remember praying about help me, because I was just I had to surrender, and I didn't know what was going to happen. I had no idea what my future was going to look like, but I knew that I was against a wall, and I had a fork that I had to deal with and help me take the right path. And my prayer scenario was the only time I really prayed. I always believed in a higher power, but the only time I really prayed was what I'll call a foxhole prayer or a 911 prayer, praying for somebody's mom who's got sick or somebody's been hurt or whatever. I'd make those prayers. But there was no regular exchange that I was having with God or my higher power. And so I had that moment for, 5-10 minutes. And what made me do that, I don't know. I believe it was a higher power, but that's me. And then the second thing, after I did that, I walked over to the lack of talent show. And I remember being in there, and I don't know what was going on. I was standing off to the side, taking this whole thing in. I remember having this warmth come over my body. And I just equated to the fact that somebody's telling me I'm right where I'm supposed to be. I've got you. I'm right where you're supposed to be. And it was just, they will tell you that you have some sort of spiritual awakening. You can chat GPT that, you'll get a bunch of different answers, definitions. I don't know. I will call that my spiritual awakening. And I believed in a higher power, but it was like my confirmation that there is a higher power. And today, what I will tell you is that if you would have told me even a year ago that I would meditate on a regular basis, and when I'm not a meditation pro, I'm doing 5-minute guided whatever, so I'm still a novice. But if you told me that I would pray every morning, meditate every morning, go to a meeting every day, whether that's on Zoom or in person, I would tell you that you're crazy, especially the meditation piece. I was like, meditation, no, that's just not Tim. But I'm amazed at how it's just helped me even more in having this even keel to myself where the highs aren't so high, the lows aren't so low. Spirituality and signs I talked about obviously the signs that I got when I first walked on Father Martin's campus. And I see little snippets of signs every single day. I think it's because I'm a lot more open now than I have been. It's you can't see things when your eyes are closed. So I just try and keep my eyes open. Hopefully that made sense.
That made so much sense. And I so appreciate that. And just so I'm clear in your story, when you said, I was told to go into that church, was it a voice? Was it an inner knowing? Like how was that message delivered to you?
I think it was just it's up. I don't want to say like I was pulled there, but it was somebody sent a note to my brain. Tim, it's probably good if you're going to start this journey, let's start with a trip to the church. That's the way that I look at it. But I think it was really just a message from a higher power of you might want to come talk to me before you start this whole thing and ask for a little guidance. That's the way that I look at it or equate it.
And so it sounds like until then, your relationship with God, spirit, was transactional. Oh, someone's sick. I'll put some money in the bank. And it's shifted to relational. Like you're actually in a dialogue and you feel that now on a daily basis, this kind of partnership or collaboration in your own evolution. This is how I would describe it.
I think that's exactly right. I used to have, as I talk about, one-way conversations with God, and it was more of I put a note in the suggestion box and walk away. In reality, now I'm picking up the phone. He's answering. I don't always know what he's saying, but I'm at least having a discussion and trying to open the channel of communication.
I share this story how 3 times in a row I saw a rainbow around the sun. And the third time that I saw it, I literally fell to my knees and put my hands over my ears and said, "What are you trying to tell me?" And the friend that I was with tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Laura, if you want to hear the answer to that, you might want to take your hands off your ears." And so clearly I felt like there was some message coming externally. What I was afraid of hearing was, "Get thee to a nunnery," because when you're raised in the Catholic Church, that's the calling, right? The call. Oh, I heard a calling that said, "Get thee to a nunnery." I didn't want to go to a nunnery. And of course, that's not what I heard. But the ironic thing is, once I started listening and following the guidance and following that voice, whether it's coming from inside of me or outside of me, I don't know. But certainly I was getting messages and signs and synchronicities. And the ironic thing is, I so would love to go to a nunnery now. A couple years ago, I was in New York and I stayed in a hotel, which I'm going to not remember the name of it, but it's a former monastery, and part of the property, it's in the West Village, and part of the property is still a monastery and a seminary. And so the room I was in was like a monastic room. And I remember because some of the people were complaining there were no TVs in the room. And I was like, yay, no TV in the room. Here I am in the middle of Manhattan in a monastic chamber room. And that craving for peace, that craving for silence, that craving for that spiritual communion that you're talking about in whatever form it is. And I want to throw out there, someone recently told me that there's actually like a Buddhist version of AA. It doesn't mean that you have to believe in all these different philosophies to be able to take advantage of the path, right? So just to say that those moments, and I remember so clearly one time also similarly falling to my knees when I was going through a really hard time when I first moved to San Francisco, and just that help me. Just sometimes that help me is all you need to say, I'm open, I'm receptive, I'm ready to hear this message, I'm ready to make a change, I'm ready to not just try to figure this all out myself. And I think that's part of this process, is realizing we think we have to figure it out on our own, and we feel like we're just out here fighting on our own. And what I love about your story is that you had people around you, and you have people around you who love you, who care about you, who want you to be present in their lives and their kids' lives. And I think when we're caught up in that cycle, we don't realize that. We don't see that, especially when we're lying to people and hiding from people. We're not then therefore connected to them. And yet it sounds like when I listen to you, it's in that connection with your son and his family, with your brother. That was where our salvation lies in many ways.
Yeah, I think that you're spot on. I think that for me, as I said, when I was in that car ride going to rehab, I realized that somebody saw that I had bigger issues than I had that I thought I had myself. So maybe I should listen and take some advice. And I remember also when at some point in time, and this was, I want to say recently, within the last year, I talked about being taken to rehab. And I think it's at some point in time, I was always thankful for it because they made a decision I couldn't make for myself, and I wouldn't be here today if they didn't do that. But I think that there was always a little tinge of resentment there. And I remember somebody else that in the regular meeting that I go to, that they said, wow, your family really had a lot of love for you. And again, somebody helps me see something that I saw, but I didn't appreciate. And so that's the other thing. I think a lot of times I hear things, but I don't listen. I see things, but I really don't see them. And I think sometimes I have to be open to listen. And it's really I'm just better off for the experience of being open to other opinions and ideas. May not always agree with them, but at least I listen.
Yeah. And that forgiveness, forgiving others for doing things that we feel maybe harmed in the very moment, but realizing that it was really done with love.
I totally agree. For me, the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is something I could have used just to live life. Forget about just having an alcohol issue. I could, although there are a couple of the first steps, which is really you're powerless over alcohol. For me, it might have been at a younger age. I'm powerless over the fact that I feel inferior in every scenario that I'm walking into. So you can, in theory, swap out alcohol for whatever you want and turn it into your own program. What it's really taught me to do is write down resentments, get over those resentments. I carried baggage about my father for years, about the fact that he was older when he had me, and I'd go out, want him to throw the football in the driveway, and his arm would get tired. And I'm like, I'm never going to be an old parent. I'm going to have a son when I'm younger because I never wanted to have that experience. I am grateful for, again, some of the things that I learned, but.
So I'll just notice something, that when I said forgiveness, you got distracted.
Okay.
And now I think again, you're talking about forgiveness and you got distracted. I'm so curious about what it is about forgiveness that's coming up for you.
So I think the thing that comes up for me is it's a hard thing to do. But I think that I now have the tools to do this. What I've learned is that when I have resentments, and as I walked through the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, you write down all of these resentments, and you, at some point in time, need to let go of them all. And my moral to my father's story is the fact that I carried that resentment of him not being able to throw a football until I was out of rehab. And then all of a sudden I went through steps and I let it go, and it's gone. And I appreciate so many more things that he did from a positive perspective. And again, I was carrying this baggage, dragging it from place to place with me for no reason at all. And I think that when I started to look at things half full, it got a lot easier to deal with resentments. The biggest thing that I've gotten better at is recognizing when I need to apologize for something. I'm a little smarter in terms of not letting words come out of my mouth that I'm going to regret. But more importantly, when I say something that I know is not right, I need to go apologize immediately. And that is the biggest thing. Maybe that's the problem with the resentments, because that's why I have to apologize early. Somebody else doesn't have a resentment against me. But I think that's the big thing for me is I have to apologize right away. I have to recognize when I've made a mistake, and my life becomes a lot cleaner when I'm open and honest about things. And I try not to say things that are hurtful to other people. My life is a lot better. I have a different aura about me that is hard to describe. I guess the best way to describe it is I'm not walking around with a lot of luggage. I can go from place to place. I don't need to pack a bag. I can just travel and be free. And I've left all of these things somewhere. And I'm so good with that I don't have to. It's like when I move, my son taught me, if you're just going to move it from one place to the next, throw it out here. If you're not going to unpack, if you didn't unpack it here, don't take it to the next place, not to unpack it again. And that's essentially what I need to do with life. I need to throw stuff out when it is no longer of value and move on with life.
I think that's a great place to end, and a great way to see things, of letting go of that baggage and even realizing you were carrying around that baggage, right? And being able to live life more free.
Yeah, and I think that all I wanted to really say is I appreciate this opportunity to talk to you. It's been great for me. And it's always good talking to you because you help me be myself, and that's a great thing these days.
I really appreciate this conversation. I know people are going to be helped by your willingness to share your story. And I'm so grateful that you're here with us today. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Surrendering to the Signs. Please like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Also, feel free to hop on over to surrenderingtothesigns.com, where you can download our free e-guide with examples and your own workbook to help you identify your signs. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode and wish you well.